The Executive Chairperson of the Democracy Works Foundation, Professor William Gumede, who's an Associate Professor in the School of Governance at the University of the Witwatersrand, joins us now to share his thoughts on this appointment. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us. I think many people in South Africa were quite surprised given what happened at the JSC interviews, the recommendation made by the JSC. They didn't see this one coming, I'm guessing.
Good evening, and thank you for having me on board, and good evening to the viewers. Yes, it will be a surprise because of the recommendation of the JSC. I mean, the JSC recommended Justice Meyer. But the president does have the final say, and the JSC make recommendations, so it's still up to the president to make the decisions. I think this is one of the most important decisions, really, from a democracy point of view, strengthening a democracy point of view, from strengthening the judiciary point of view. And I think Justice Zondo really has personified, the fight against corruption in the country. I think almost, everyone across the country knows him now, and he's become synonymous with the anti-corruption fight in the country, and also standing up against politicians, against the powerful. And I think he, what he stands for, and what he really also stands for, the independence of the judiciary.
The reaction largely, and I suppose expectedly, has been political in nature, but it doesn't sound as if anyone can question the merit of him being the Chief Justice.
No, absolutely. Based on merit, he really is, at the top of his game. In fact, it would have been a controversial if he was not appointed. For example, if the president had appointed Justice Meyer or anyone else, it would have been a controversial appointment, and it would have been almost like, if you remember the last time when Justice Dikgang Moseneke didn't get the Chief Justice jobs at the time because he was critical of the ANC and he never got a job. It would have been the same sort of thing. And if Justice Zondo didn't get a job, and I think there would have been an uproar in the country, and ordinary people would have felt, in civil society, in the media, that look, the president himself and government is not serious about fighting corruption and strengthening the judiciary.
There's been an uproar on social media from some quarters that, hang on, why do you have all these interviews and then the president appoints who he feels like? And then I remember that back in 2011, President Jacob Zuma actually gave the Judicial Services Commission one name, and he did that even before he consulted with them. And so this process has been, by and large, a bit wider, more inclusive, and maybe even more transparent.
No, absolutely. This has been a most transparent process, and that also helped us to give, we got a sense of how it is done, and now we could also see clearly the weakness of the system. For example, I mean, the Judicial Services Commission, we can see the weakness. There are just too many politicians on there. And secondly, the absence of civil society on there, and also the absence of people who are not legal people, because that's also important. Even these days, not only in South Africa, but around the world, even in legal firms these days, it's becoming increasingly important also to have non-legal people on the boards of those kind of firms, to help with oversight and to have a different kind of scrutiny of the activities. So I think because it's been so transparent and because of the politicking by politicians on the JSC, I think we can now, as a society, we clearly saw the weaknesses and what needs to be strengthened in the process.
Yeah, there are even outcries of patriarchy. How come you didn't appoint Justice Mandisa Meyer? But I suppose in many ways this could be to her advantage, being Deputy Chief Justice, and that the current Chief Justice will have quite a short tenure.
Yes, no. So from their point of view, yes. I mean, the president did say that. Well, he will nominate her as the Deputy Chief Justice. I mean, that will also give her really as a team with the new Chief Justice Zondo, I think the opportunity to build a team and to take and have the possibility to take over thereafter. Of course, those things are never clear cut because when the Chief Justice is elected, we still have to have the same kind of JSC interviews. So if you're a deputy, doesn't mean you get the job automatically. But I mean, I think that different now from previously. If you remember when Jacob Zuma, I mean, you just mentioned it when he was the president and he appointed Justice Mogoeng as the Chief Justice, and he only nominated one individual. He gave, and so on. There wasn't at the time, strangely, I mean, there wasn't the kind of public engagement around the issues. Of course there were, but not and so on. I think this time the good thing about it being so transparent, because I think last time maybe people didn't understand how the JSC process worked. It seemed very opaque to the public, but now at least much more transparent.
All right. So I suppose also he might be able to, I mean, she's accomplished already, no question, as the president of the Supreme Court, but he probably will be able to offer her some mentorship for this top job for her, maybe, that she might get in the future.
No, I don't want to dwell too much on that because this is the moment for Chief Justice Zondo. Yeah. And we have to recognize it is, this is his moment. And I think this is a very important moment also for the country because the next 2 years, at least until the next national election, it really is the period of prosecution of the corrupt. The people who've been listed in the Zondo Commission for being corrupt. And I think the public is expected. They want to see prosecutions. They want to see people being sent to jail for corruption or assets being seized. Yeah. And I think, the new Chief Justice really is going to be a very important role for him to steer. It's going to be very tricky. It's going to be very tricky a couple of years because there's going to be people who will oppose the prosecution of the corrupt. There's going to be people who will attack the judiciary, and you will need a steady hands of Justice Zondo during this process, ahead of us.
So, what do you think he'll bring to the job? I'm wondering if we got a clue when he spoke out against the criticism that Minister Sisulu gave to the judiciary in general. He was quite angry and he went out and said, hang on, this is what I think about what you've said. Might he be giving us a clue as to the kind of person he'll be in the top job?
Yes, I think the Zondo Commission actually for him has actually been an experience building. A very important experience building because when the prosecution of the corrupt starts, in real earnest, you need a Chief Justice that does understand the sort of political nuances and who can fight back and can push back against the politicians, against the political fight back. It's going to be, we're going to see a massive political fight back against the judiciary once the prosecution comes. So I think, he brings that kind of experience. And secondly, he's a very steady hand. I mean, we've seen it, even not only the Zondo Commission, but, in his previous roles, a steady hand, a calm hand, and somebody who will defend to the last the independence of the judiciary.
Do you think that we are now getting into an era much like the United States where, by and large, politics has a really big hand over the appointment of these Superior Court judges? And I just wonder, because there is a lot of politics shadowing what's happened in this process this time around, maybe because of the Zondo Commission or not, I'm not sure, but is this something that we'll see again and again going forward?
One of the weaknesses, related to politicians is really conflict of interest. I'm teaching conflict of interest for members of parliament, and even in this process, when I was, just observing the JSC process, conflicts of interest were not followed. And I explained a conflict of interest. For example, if you think advocate Prof, who was was also, his other role is also as a politician. Now, he represented former President Jacob Zuma in the Zondo Commission, but also, of course, in courts and the sort of corruption hearings. Now, that is a conflict of interest. You can't be then on the JSC interviewing, a judge that presided in a case where those sort of things, yeah. So that's unacceptable. It's a conflict of interest. So those kind of things will have to be tightened up going forward. So I think there has to be a lessons learned from this very transparent JSC process to see, how do we tighten, how do we democratize the process even more? So, so conflicts of interest. So, and another conflict of interest is, for example, if a politician, let's just say Julius Malema, president of the EFF, I mean, he criticized judiciary before. Now, once you criticize judiciary, it's a conflict of interest to then to sit on the JSC and then to preside over the election of a new justice. It's a conflict of interest. Yeah. So those are the things that are going to have to be tightened. And that is also with those things why it is important not just to leave the processes like the JSC just to legal people. And so on, or just to politicians who have a very narrow outlook, because we have to look in a broader, governance, democracy, in a constitutional.
Do you think that, and you mentioned it earlier, that the weaknesses have been highlighted in this particular process because it was transparent and we could see more? Do you think that this perhaps might raise the issue of giving one man absolute power to appoint somebody so senior, and that maybe he shouldn't be given so much power alone, because we always assume that the president and the head of state at the time is a good guy. But, every once in a while, some gangster's going to show up. And can we trust them to appoint a Chief Justice?
I think we've seen it under the Jacob Zuma presidency, sort of gangster-like behavior. And I'm sure some gangs on the Cape Flats or wherever, there's almost similarities, that kind of behavior. But, I mean, I'm to the point. Certainly, I think when the Constitution was put together, I don't think the framers of the Constitution, I think one of the weaknesses when they put it together was to put too much power in general in the hands of the presidents. There's no other comparative democracy, really. I mean, and I've looked at it, where a president of a country in a democratic context, of course, not in an autocratic, can appoint so many people. I mean, for example, the Chief Justice is just one of it. But almost, the president can almost appoint or have to approve almost every CEO of a state-owned company, for example, the agency of the oversight, the Chapter 9 institutions and so on. So, it's even like just making all of those appointments, of course, is humanly impossible to apply your mind. It's going to mean every day you're just going to look at who you're going to appoint. Yeah. So that's really, it's a weakness, and it is something we could strengthen. But coming back to the appointment of the Chief Justice process, and I think there's two other weaknesses there. The one, of course, is that the president has too much power. So firstly, the president has dual power. So, the first part of the power is that the president can actually nominate people to sit on the JSC. So that's one part of his power. Then he has got his final power that he actually makes the final recommendation. So you can see that's too much power. Yeah. And then there's a fourth part of weakness there in that sort of where the politicians have too much say, is that the justice minister sits also as an individual on the JSC. Again, that is not only a conflict of interest. You think about it, there's a justice minister. The justice minister has to engage, with justices and so on. So you cannot have him or her sitting in a process of electing judges, especially the Chief Justice, in particular. So those are some of the reforms that we have to look at going forward.
All right, so we've run out of time, but perhaps just one quick question. We've seen it with the former public protector, where a person comes into the office and by their conduct and their public engagement and their public face, she elevated the office. Suddenly people knew what the public protector was, what the public protector does. Do you think Justice Zondo will do the same for the office of the Chief Justice?
I think he has the potential. He has the gravitas. He's got a record. It was extraordinary how Advocate Madonsela, when she became the public protector, how she turned around that office. How she increased the power of the office. So not power because he's a politician or power because there's a lot of money in the office or so on, but just the authority, the dignity that she brought. Her honesty. Acting in the wider interest of all South Africans, of all of South Africa. So that almost brought a glow to her. So I think, Judge Zondo can do exactly the same because, if he can bring an authority to the office, and using his dignity, his sense of justice, his honesty, and acting in the interest of all of South Africa.
Prof. Gumede, always great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us on the program.
Thank you.